You're listening to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. As an American, you have freedom flowing through your DNA, and we are here to help educate, empower, and encourage you to stand for your freedom.
Hello, County Citizens. Today we are in Miami-Dade County with Dr. Ben Carson. Dr. Carson is a former politician and neurosurgeon who served as our 17th United States Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. He is now the founder of American Cornerstone Institute and has recently launched a new book titled Why America Matters. I am joined today by Steve Maxwell, co-founder and president of County Citizens Defending Freedom, and Alex Serrano, executive director over Miami-Dade. Will you please help me welcome Dr. Ben Carson?
Dr. Carson, thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Welcome.
I am absolutely delighted to be here with you all.
Thank you.
I'm thrilled with what you're doing at the local level.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So can you start us from the beginning and take us through your childhood?
That's a long story. But, you know, my parents got divorced when I was 8 years old. They were both from Chattanooga, Tennessee. My mother was 13 when she was married, trying to escape dire poverty, very poor education, less than a third grade education. And yet they were actually doing okay in Detroit until she discovered that he was a bigamist. And of course that resulted in a divorce. We had no place to live. Some relatives in Boston took us in. It was a pretty awful environment. Large multifamily dwelling, boarded up windows and doors, sirens, gangs, murders. Both of my favorite older cousins were killed. That was the environment. We were there for a couple of years, and we were able to get back to Detroit. My mother working 2 or 3 jobs at a time as a domestic because she didn't like the idea of welfare. And I was a terrible student. Probably the worst student you've ever seen in your life.
I don't know about that.
It was pretty bad. But, you know, my mother made me read books. And even though I didn't like it at first, after a while I began to love reading books. I couldn't wait to get home. I went from having a nickname of dummy to a nickname of having bookworm. And went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. And just really had a different kind of outlook on life at that point, because as I was reading about all these successful people, I began to realize that, you know, if I was going to be successful, it was really up to me. I was the person who really had the most to do with what happened. And
Yeah.
It just completely changed who I was at that point. And my horizons began to broaden very significantly at that point. And went on to win a scholarship to Yale and University of Michigan Medical School and internship and residency, and by age 33 was chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins.
What a great story. I may one up you though, because you said you read your first book when you were young. I read mine after high school, so I still wonder. You know, how I graduated high school. But I'm an avid reader as well. It's amazing what that does. But what an amazing story. And so, what was the first trigger? I mean, you said your mother forced you to read, but do you recall the moment that you said, "Man, this is"?
Yes, I do. It was I started out reading animal books. I loved animal stories. First book I read was Chip the Dam Builder. It was about this cool beaver. But I ended up reading all the animal books in the Detroit Public Library.
Wow.
And then I went to plants, and then I went to rocks, because we lived near the railroad tracks. And what is there along the railroad tracks?
Rocks.
So I would collect boxes of them, study them. Still a dummy. Nobody knew about this, but pretty soon I could tell you any rock, how it was formed,
Wow.
where it came from. And one day the science teacher walked in, he held up a big black shiny rock. He says, "Can anybody tell me what this is?" And I never answered questions. But nobody raised their hand, and I raised my hand. And of course, everybody was shocked. Carson, oh, this is going to be fun, you know? And he called me and I said, "Mr. Jake, that's obsidian." And there was silence. because they didn't know whether it was right or wrong. They didn't know
Yeah,
whether
they didn't
should
know.
be laughing
Yeah.
or what, you know. And finally, after he got over his shock, he said, "That's right, it is obsidian." And then I explained how obsidian was formed, and everybody was like, "What?" But that's when I realized it. I said, all these smart kids, they didn't know the answer. You knew the answer.
Yeah.
Because you were reading the
Wow.
book. I said, aren't you tired of being called a dummy? I said, what if you read books about everything? Can
Yeah.
you imagine how smart you would be?
Yeah.
And that was it.
That was a light
That was
bulb
the
moment.
trigger.
That is awesome. What a story.
Yeah.
What a story. Well, I know your story has just encouraged a lot of people. I know one of the things we are looking to is the destruction of the family and how we can help in that arena. What in your childhood, you know, your story is so compelling. I think of inner city children that don't have this hope. What advice could you give them based on your experience that could provide that hope? Because when you lose the hope, you lose the life.
Well, I have to tell you, there were a lot of things in the environment saying you can't make it.
Yeah.
You're going to fail. This is not going to work. For me, the anchor that I had was my faith
Amen.
in God. You know, and I would read those stories, and I would really cling to stories like Joseph in the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, sold into slavery by his own brothers.
Yeah.
He didn't say, "Bummer, my own brothers sold me into slavery."
Yeah.
He said, "I'll be the best slave there is."
Yeah.
And he ends up over Potiphar's household. And then Potiphar's wife lies about him, and he ends up in jail. He doesn't say, "Here I am living up to the best of my ability, and I end up in jail." He said, "No, if I'm going to be a prisoner, I'll be the best prisoner there is." Mm-hmm. He ends up with a responsible position there, and then from there goes on to become the governor of Egypt. You know, those kinds of stories really gravitated to me and made me believe that regardless of what situation you find yourself in, you can make something good out of it. And, you know, that's what we need to be teaching
Amen. That's exactly
our
right.
children. Not what you can't do, but what you can do.
Yep.
And my mother was always saying, if anybody can do it, you can do it, except you can do it better.
I love
we
it.
always
It's
knew that was coming
attitude,
up from
right?
that.
It's how you see yourself, right?
Exactly.
That's why education is so critical, and the messaging
Exactly.
is
And
so
I
critical.
was exactly the same person when I was a failing student that
Yeah.
I was when I was an A student. I just had it changed in my mental processing.
Did you always grow up with conservative political views?
I did not. Remember, I grew up in Detroit, radical left-wing city, and in Boston, radical left-wing city. And then from there I went to New Haven, radical left-wing city. And then from New Haven to Ann Arbor, radical left-wing city. And then from Ann Arbor to Baltimore, radical left-wing city. So I should have been a radical left-winger,
Yeah.
and I was.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I did something that you're not supposed to do if you're a radical left-winger. I listened to a Republican. I listened to Ronald Reagan.
Mm.
And I said, he sounds just like my mother.
Mm. Yeah.
Exactly the same stuff that she used to say. And, you know, I started reevaluating my positions on everything. And that's where I made the transition.
Amazing. Yep. That's amazing. That's a great story. So the good news from that to me is that if you are willing to open up and listen to your mother's voice through someone else, right?
Exactly.
There's hope, right?
Well, you know, it goes back to, I did leave out a very significant part of my history, and that is I had a horrible temper. And part of the way of curing that was reading the Bible, reading the book of Proverbs.
Yeah.
And I start every day reading that book now, and I end every day reading that book. And it says to me also that God had a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Because Proverbs was written by Solomon, and my middle name is Solomon. So
Wow.
he knew I was going to have that affinity.
Yeah.
And also, you may remember the first incident that made Solomon very famous as king. There were two women who came to him claiming to be the mother of the baby.
That's right.
And what did he advocate? He said, divide the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's when I became very well known, when I divided babies.
Yeah. There you go. That's right.
So I think God has a sense of humor.
He does have a sense of humor. He does. Speaking of your medical profession, when was that decision made, and how was that path?
That decision was made when I was 8 years old.
Wow.
I loved to hear the stories about the missionary doctors. And, you know, it changed from missionary doctor to psychiatrist to cardiothoracic surgeon to neurosurgeon, but it was always medicine. It was the only thing I ever wanted to do. And it was an adventure, there's no question about it. And it required a lot of diligence and hard work. But, you know, there were things that occurred that made it clear to me that God was there. For instance, when I was a first-year medical student, I did very poorly on the first set of comprehensives, and so poorly, in fact, that I was sent to see my counselor, who told me to drop out of medical school. Instead of trying to help me, he said, there's no hope for you. You're not cut out for medicine. You're just not going to make it. And I just prayed. I said, Lord, show me, because I'm sure you want me to be a doctor. And I just started thinking. I said, what kind of courses have you done well in? What kind of courses have you struggled in? And I knew I did well when I did a lot of reading, and I struggled when I listened to a lot of boring lectures, because I don't get anything out of boring lectures. Some people do. I get nothing out of it. And I'm 6 to 8 hours a day sitting there listening to these things and getting nothing out of them. So I just made an executive decision to skip the boring lectures, to spend that time reading, and the rest of medical school was a snap after that.
Wow.
And years later, when I went back to my medical school as the commencement speaker, I was looking for that counselor, because I was going to tell him he wasn't cut out to be a counselor. Because there's so many people who are just negative all the time.
Yeah.
And what if they spent half that energy trying to be encouraging, and trying to help people find
100%.
solutions, you know?
You know, you keep touching on the faith pillar, and how you touched on how it relates to education. And tomorrow here in Miami-Dade County, our school board, one of the school board members is introducing an agenda item to adopt May 5th as the National Day of Prayer, right?
In school?
For all faiths, in school. So I was wondering, what do you think about that? You know, there's some people that feel that shouldn't be in school. There's obviously our organization is very faith-based, and we support that. So I was wondering how you feel about that.
Well, I'll put it this way. Our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, talks about certain unalienable rights given to us by our Creator.
By our Creator, amen.
That's right.
And
The American belief system.
every coin in your pocket, every bill in your wallet says, in God we trust. Why wouldn't it be in our schools?
That's a great question.
One nation under God. Right.
Exactly.
I've often heard of it as you know, in sports you have a rule book. You know, in football they throw off a flag, or in the Bible really it becomes a playbook for life. It tells you, gives you that guidance. I think we bought into this separation of church and state, and it's
Right.
devastated.
And it's not even a part of our Constitution.
Exactly
It's
right.
not part of the Bill of Rights.
Exactly right.
It's not part of the Declaration of Independence. It was a Supreme Court ruling where that was first brought in, and it didn't mean that you couldn't live out your faith.
Yep.
So this has been something that's been totally, manipulated
Yep.
by those who are not lovers of God.
How did you segue from being a doctor to going to being a politician?
I didn't. I never became a politician.
Great answer.
Because politicians do things that are politically expedient.
Yeah.
And I believed in doing things that are right. So I would never classify myself as a politician. But how did I get into the political arena would probably be a better question. And I never intended to. if you had asked me 10 years ago, would you end up in politics? You're crazy. I wouldn't even consider it. But, you know, after I gave the National Prayer Breakfast in 2013, there were people all over the country, every place I went, with placards, run, Ben, run.
Yeah.
And over 500,000 petitions in my office to run. And I finally said, well, Lord, if you really want me to do this, you're going to have to give me all the things that a person who runs for president has, a Rolodex with all the names, organization, a lot of money. And I said, I really don't want to run, so I'm not going to try to create any of those things. So if you want it, you have to do it. All of a sudden, boom, it was there. Organization was raising more money than the RNC. Even, it was ridiculous. So it all just came into being. And, you know, the Lord He plays the long game. We play the short game. Yeah. And we just have to take what He leads, where He leads us. If I hadn't run for president, I wouldn't have become Secretary of HUD. If I hadn't become Secretary of HUD, I wouldn't have created American Cornerstone. We wouldn't have this tool to fight what's going on in our country. Mm-hmm. So He knows what He's doing.
That's right.
That's right.
What prompted you to write your new book, Why America Matters?
I was prompted to write that because of all the indoctrination that's going on with our children. Mm-hmm. And I want to start early because they start early.
That's right.
And the Bible tells us to start early. In Proverbs
right.
22:6, it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old enough, depart from it. Mm-hmm. And, of course, they know that. The other side knows that, too. Mm-hmm. That's why Vladimir Lenin said, give me your children to teach for 4 years. Mm-hmm. And the seed that I sow will never be uprooted. So they know. So I say, we need to start early, too.
Yeah.
And so we start with something at kindergarten, first, second, third grade level. And, you know, we're going to be expanding all of that material, which is online, free of charge, by the way. A lot of people don't know that. It costs a lot of money to create this stuff. Mm-hmm. We recently hired a Disney animator who is not woke, by the way.
I'm glad you said that part.
There was a pause there.
Beautiful illustrations and stories. And then we're going to be expanding into middle school and to high school, all of which will be free of charge because we have wonderful donors who underwrite all of this stuff.
Yeah.
In the book, you mentioned how a bald eagle has a left wing and a right wing in order to fly. Yeah. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Well, I think it's such a wonderful example because it's our national bird. And we have right-wingers and we have left-wingers. And, you know, if all they do is fight each other, you're never going to take flight. But if they learn to work together, which is so important, because we live in a multifaceted society. You can't, in a multifaceted society, have a my way or the highway philosophy. Mm-hmm. You've got to be willing to talk to each other. And I think those of us who love America and understand the principles of our founding need to understand that there are others who have other feelings. And we need to be able to talk to them. And I have no problem with compromising methods. I don't compromise principles, but you can certainly compromise methods of doing things. And, you know, if you can sit down, for instance, with the radical left who feels that green energy is the only way to go, I think you can then get them to understand that in order to get the green energy, you have to have other energy. You don't dig yourself a gigantic hole that you got to take 50 years to climb out of so that you can then start working on green energy. You use what you have to get what you want. And as it becomes more feasible economically, then you substitute. That's what intelligent people do. Non-intelligent people just say, no, it's got to be my way or the highway, and we just can't do anything else, and we can't even consider anything else. That's foolishness.
Yep. I was going to ask too, in this modern day, we've got a lot of, you hear the word globalism or globalists that are apparently attempting to have open societies and this one world economy. I'd just be interested in hearing your comments on that current situation. We have an open border in Texas right now, it appears. I mean, the country is really, it feels like it's under attack.
It is under attack.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to destroy the foundations of a country like this in order for it to join that kind of global society that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Why would it want to otherwise?
Yeah.
So a lot of the things that we've been seeing certainly seem to be heading toward destroying our nation.
Yeah.
If I was trying to destroy this nation and I was in a position to do so, I couldn't do a better job than what's being done right now. And what it really means is that those of us who understand the founding principles of this nation and who love this nation and who appreciate the sacrifices that others made in order to give us this nation, we have to be willing to stand and fight. You can't stand in the corner with your head down and hope no one calls you a name. You know, you have to be brave. Yep. Because you cannot be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave.
Amen.
That's right. You know, talking about the attack on the country and going back to the education, we, on another agenda item on our school board meeting tomorrow is adoption of instructional materials. So they're trying to adopt 9 books, 2 of which are under the topic of health.
Right.
And we've been uncovering attacks on the children on their way of thinking that is very concerning, but it's good that there's organizations like ours, like yours, that counter that.
And I've seen some of these books, and what we have to recognize is that there's a reason that the film industry has ratings.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
And, there is an appropriate time to expose children to certain things, but not at a very young age.
That's correct.
And, it's like trying to teach, a third grader calculus. They're not ready for that yet. You teach them all the other stuff first and create the foundation for that. And, as far as their sexuality, I'm not sure that that's even something that should be taught outside of the purview of the home unless the parents request it.
That's our position as well. Yeah, just biology only, and anything beyond that is up to the parents.
And obviously they're not even teaching the biology appropriately because we have people, being appointed to the Supreme Court who don't even know what a woman is.
Because they're not a biologist, right?
Because they're not a biologist.
What was your greatest challenge being head of HUD?
I think the greatest challenge was working with the people on the Hill who liked the concept of dependency. Mm-hmm. And we were working very hard to create self-sufficiency. And so we butted heads with them a lot because there are people who basically see the populace in terms of voting blocks, not in terms of people that they represent, not in terms of constituents, not in terms of people whose lives we should be improving, but how do we get this block of people to vote for me?
A means to an end, per se.
Exactly. And it's really quite sad. And it's quite prevalent on both sides of the aisle, one side of the aisle more so than the other. You can probably figure out where that is.
What was the biggest, when you went into the HUD areas where you have the housing, and I know a lot of those are inner city areas type thing, what was the biggest subject matter that a single mom brought to you?
The fact that they couldn't afford anything, and that it was becoming more and more difficult to afford it, and would they end up homeless? That was a major concern for so many people. And unfortunately, it's a legitimate concern.
Sure.
You know, particularly in places like California, the costs are absolutely astronomical, principally because of regulatory burdens. You can take something that started out as affordable, and by the time you get to adding all the regulatory issues onto it, it's way beyond affordable. And yet, you know, we're getting more and more subsidies. You know, we're spending in Los Angeles on all those homeless people about $400,000 a year each.
Wow.
Wow.
Now, can you imagine what you could do with that done in an efficient manner?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But no one's interested in efficiency.
So where do you see the United States of America in 10 years?
Well, a lot is going to depend on whether the people are awake, or are they going to allow themselves to slide into socialism. Remember, America is an experiment. No one thought that you could have a country that was run on the will of the people, that you had to have a monarch, you had to have, you know, that kind of authority. You can't have a place like America. Mm-hmm. And obviously that fight is going on at this very moment.
Absolutely.
Can it really be about the people, or should it be about the government? Big fight right now.
Big fight.
And that goes back to the inborn rights from our Creator, right?
Exactly. So, you know, we have a major job to do. You know, I really appreciate your organization, the fact that you're willing to get into the fray and fight, because it's so much easier just to get into bed and pull the covers over your head and not worry about it. The problem with that is eventually someone's going to come and pull the covers off your head.
Yeah, that's one of the things we talk about with our folks is, you know, the last real generation that paid a price for these freedoms was the World War II generation.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got I had a great-grandmother had 8 grandsons in the war at the same time. You know, everybody got involved in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly.
It's going to require that again, and
it was,
throws a switch. You got to throw the switch on, right?
It was a community effort.
That's right.
Everybody from the cities, from the suburbs, from the country. The women went into the factories. They built more airplane tanks and bombs than anybody could imagine.
A picture of my dad rolling a rim of a tire, steel drives, rubber drives. Everybody pitched in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Community. That's the key.
Yep.
And that's what's being broken up right now by the forces of division. They're driving wedges in our society on the basis of race, religion, age, gender, income, you name it. They're driving wedges, trying to divide us.
Yep.
And the question is, are we going to fall for it? Are we going to give up everything for our children, our grandchildren, everybody before it, because we are foolish enough to fall for it?
Let me ask you this. There's lots of propaganda surrounding racism. What are practical ways that we can help end racism but not participate in the propaganda that's happening?
Well, for one thing, we can tell people the truth about slavery. You know, the left tries to make you think that the United States is uniquely evil because of slavery. Slavery has been a part of human society since there's been history written. So we're not unique in having slavery. We are unique, however, in the fact that we had so many people who were opposed to it that we were willing to fight a civil war and lose a large portion of our population to get rid of it. And we need to make people understand that and know that. We should also help people to understand that when it comes to how rapidly a society can change, you know, when I was a kid, in my lifetime, I remember when a black person came on television and they weren't some type of a servant, it was a big deal. You called everybody in.
Mm-hmm.
That's completely non-existent anymore.
Yeah.
Now you have black admirals and generals and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and we've had a black president, a black vice president, I mean, black university presidents, even Ivy League schools. I mean, I'm just talking about in my lifetime.
Yeah.
For society to change that dramatically, you have to be a moron not to recognize.
There you have it.
Or you'd have to have some kind of agenda that you're trying to drive, not to recognize that.
In 2021, you founded American Cornerstone Institute. What was the reason that you decided to start that?
Basically, because I realized that America was moving away from its foundation, and that we needed to re-emphasize those things that made America into a good nation. Our faith, so important, because that Judeo-Christian foundation teaches us how to relate to our neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
It says, love your neighbor, not cancel your neighbor. And, you know, we have been the beacon of liberty for the entire world. Any society, anywhere around the world, who's oppressed, where do they want to go? Where is their destination?
Yeah.
Right here in America. And we have to do everything we can to preserve that.
Yeah.
And you see how rapidly it can disappear. Look at China today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, look at what happened to Venezuela. It used to be a wonderful place. I've visited there many times, and it was such a happy nation. And they had beautiful resorts and hotels and museums, and the biggest argument that people are always having is whether or not they were the most beautiful people in the world. That's what they argued about.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? And to go from the most prosperous nation in South America to the worst almost overnight.
Yep.
And
Well,
then with community, the fact that we're able to work together from so many diverse backgrounds, people from everywhere all over the world, to congeal into this strong nation, that is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And then life. And as we've grown more callous about life from the womb to the tomb, we've grown more callous in our relationships to each other.
Yeah.
So those cornerstone principles have to be brought back and put front and center. And I think we will rapidly rise again if we do that.
Yep. And we thank you for what you're doing,
Yeah.
and we feel we're similar on the same path, getting engaged. I have a friend that was telling me about 2 weeks ago that he has a friend in Egypt, of all places, that called him, and we had some sort of victory that was in the media, and he was rooting us on. He said the whole world's watching America,
Amen.
and they are, and
They are.
they know that if America falls, that the world's going to fall.
There's no hope if
There's no
America
hope.
goes.
Yeah.
It'll
The
go.
last stand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've also been fighting books in the school systems here in Florida,
Right.
cleaning them up.
And maybe helping people to understand that, you know, we're not for censoring things, but we are for using common sense.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we recognize that there are things that are age appropriate and there are things that are not age appropriate. And you shouldn't have to be a genius to figure that out.
And we're finding out, too, that it's really about power right now. It's about parental power versus institutional power. We're there to protect the children. It's ironic that very few conversations are about protecting the children. There's a civics lesson involved. We have state statutes that say, what is that? That's the will of the people that you elected and set those statutes up. And so we're just holding people accountable to the will of the people, which is in the form of a statute. Do you think we... I mean, we made Media Matters last week, and we were just so proud of that. That's as tough as it gets, right?
Praise the Lord.
But there's a really dark spirit, I would call it, over the world, the death, the pandemic, the gloom and doom. And yet we have a light, we have, we go back to these founding principles you're talking about. And
it's a perfect time.
Perfect time.
Perfect time for us to have a revival.
Hey, I say this, is that what we say all the time?
Yeah.
Well, Reformation.
We've had 4 of them in the history of this country.
Amen.
And they've all been around either war or pandemic. We got both now. So
Amen.
This is the perfect time for
I
one.
agree 100%. We're praying for it.
Amen.
That's awesome.
What would your piece of advice be to someone who's struggling to find their purpose in life?
I would say reflect. Ask yourself, what am I really, really good at? Everybody's really good at something. And, you know, what happens to so many people is they never stop and think about what they're good at. They see somebody they admire and they want to be like them. You don't have to be like anybody else. You can look inside of yourself, and if you can't see it, talk to people that you know. Say, what have you noticed about me that's really special? And you're going to start getting the same answer from a bunch of people. That's something important. And, you know, if you can choose a pathway, an educational pathway, a career pathway that takes advantage of your special gift, you're going to go a lot further than trying to squeeze yourself into somebody else's mold.
Exactly right. So, great advice.
Just want to thank you for everything you're doing, Dr. Carson. You know, I was at the school reading this morning. The kids were loving the American bald eagle,
They were
trying to
having a good
find it in
time
every.
with
And tonight, I think we've got a great program for the adult crowd. So I just want to thank you for investing your time, for everything you're doing with ACI, and thank you for
Service to our country.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of people who are looking for that moral guidance right now, and you're one of those people that people look to.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you guys working, you know, at the local level, because that's where the war is going to be won.
Yeah.
That's right.
And as I've traveled around the country, I've seen a lot of people who are now running for the school board, who are running for city council, who are running for various things, trying to change things. That's the only way it's going to happen.
That's right.
So thank you guys for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, county citizens, thank you so much for listening today.